Okay, I'm glad for that later. Okay. This is sort of probably the most important thing. What's the future of MINIX? You know, some of you know I'm sort of officially retired, and at some point I'll be actually retired. And I think it's sort of appropriate to think about what the future is and sort of turning this thing over to the younger generation in some sense, which I'm quite happy to do. So, key question is, how do you build a community? I'm not a good community organizer. You know, I wrote to Barack Obama. I used to be a community organizer. He didn't answer me. But you need the way to build a community and, you know, improve collaboration between people. You know, this conference was an attempt to get that started. Should there be one in 2017? I don't know. Just as an aside, this conference is losing about 5,000 euros because we set the registration fee very, very low. People would come, but it doesn't actually cover the, just renting this room costs 2,000 euros, and there's a lot of other costs too. So should we have another conference, even though, you know, we maybe charge 100 euro or more, I don't know, to do it. How to get volunteers to do things is a very, very important thing, which the BSDs have that problem too. I've been to a couple of BSD conferences, and like BSD Canada, which is one of the big ones, it was like, and it was a 3-day conference, and there were probably 500 people there, and there were 100 talks, you know, in parallel sessions, and it was an enormous community out there. And I don't expect anything like that, but how can we start a little community here? More and better PR. I gave like 5 talks all over the world last year on MINIX, but maybe other kinds of PR. I think, I know what the BSDs have. They all have like a steering committee. Okay, there's some core group under some name or other which sort of runs the project in some sense. And you know, you need some rules for who will be on the steering committee, and you know, what are their jobs exactly. You know, making roadmaps, planning conferences, figuring out who can commit. You know, I think there's a need for a steering committee, and you know, I don't know how to do that. Is there a niche for MINIX 3? Well, what's it good for? You know, one of the things it has now, the live update, might be a potential niche for it, of systems that really don't want to go down. For whatever reason, they want the thing to run all the time. Presumably in the embedded or industrial worlds. In desktops, it's less of an issue. But in the industrial world, if you're running some kind of a system which is supposed to be up 24/7, having the ability to do live update might be a real plus. But what is its niche? What is the roadmap needed to fill that niche? You know, is the key thing other platforms? If it ran on the Raspberry Pi, then everything would be wonderful? I don't know. You know, that might be a niche. I don't know if that's a kid. Is there some key piece of software we needed? If we only had a proper browser, then you know, all of a sudden it'd be real popular. Import Midori or Firefox, I think too complicated, but Midori, there's other smaller browsers that are great. Is there some key piece of software that we had to have? If we had that, everything would be great. You know, it's the problem with the documentation. That's something anybody can work on. We have a wiki. It's pretty good. It's a little bit out of date in places. So certainly it'd be nice to improve that, but I don't think that's the bottleneck. So whatever. We can have a discussion now. We have until 6 o'clock. And maybe we can continue the discussion on the Google News group. But I'd sort of like to throw the floor up and now for, like, what do we do going forward? I don't really have the answers myself. I think that a steering committee of, I don't know, some number of people, I don't know how many, not so many you can't manage it, but not so few that there, you know, somebody there, sort of in between, I don't know, whatever. I know, for example, 3BSD has a core team of 9 people. Okay, that's the size of their steering committee. And NetBSD runs in a somewhat different structure, but some group of people who basically sort of run the show. You know, and so I'm quite happy to turn things over to a steering committee if we can get this thing sort of set up. We need volunteers who are willing to do what's needed. And that's the nature of all open source projects, right? There's lots of open source projects out there. It isn't like, you know, I showed you the statistics earlier. It isn't like nobody has any interest at all in MINIX. We've had 2.68 million visits to the website. There were 80, you know, downloads of the code, you know, already today. It's like running 10 an hour. It's been doing that for more than 10 years. So there is interest, but it's not well organized. And, you know, we had funding and so on. It was all sort of centralized. Now I want to sort of go to become a normal open source project, and I don't know how to do that exactly. So, what do we do?
Do you have an idea of how many people are actually using MINIX and what they do with it?
No, I didn't know that anybody was using it until I saw Bernd at the BSD conference in Canada. I said, my God, somebody's using MINIX, I didn't even know about it. Okay? So I don't know, basically. That's one of the properties of the BSD license is go take it, do whatever you want with it, and you have to tell anybody. cuts the other way too. I mean, they change it, they don't have to, well, of course, they could go out and use it, put the code on their website, be in compliance with the GPL and not tell anybody, just sit there if you want to, if you can find it, you know. So I don't know. It's really weird, but
is your idea if it is mainly in teaching or mainly in other applications?
I don't know.
So I guess the current MINIX is not that suitable for teaching any longer.
Well, if you compare it to other systems that are out there, it's probably still one of the simpler ones, but it's not as simple as it was, no. But I think, I mean, there's a whole question of how we can do another book or so, it's a whole other story. But it's still, you know, the microkernel part of it hasn't really got a lot more complicated. It's gotten somewhat more complicated, but not a lot more. And the individual servers are still, you can study each, you know, by itself because it's pretty isolated. It doesn't tie into the rest of the system, and it interfaces with the other pieces via well-defined protocols. So I think it's still, you know, you can take the file system and study it as a file system by itself and ditto the other pieces. So it's gotten more complicated, but it's still fairly modular.
But perhaps it's a good idea to find a direction other than teaching for MINIX, for example, the Internet of Things. So if there's something that really works well with MINIX, small devices with sensors and actuators or something, then I think people would really want to use it. And I think there is, for example, the makers community that really like to do 3D printing, and they basically want to understand everything they do. So I think MINIX is a very good target for the things they want to do and use their software.
Right, we had a talk, you know, from Michael before about the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
And, you know, also those are more resource constrained things where, you know, very large systems, you know, don't fit, and then as you can strip down, if you don't need a full-blown file system, it's pretty easy not to put the full-blown file system in and so on. And so it might be the Internet of Things or low-end things. Or, that's an example of an embedded system. So
but I think if you can show on for example, on the MINIX web page, look, this is MINIX works really well for a particular kind of thing. I think then we could get some momentum.
That's certainly possible. That was the question. What niche? An Internet of Things.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, might well be that niche.
Yeah, coming back about teaching, the fact that MINIX is now bigger than it used to be is not an obstacle for teaching because it's still modular and it's still possible to throw quite quickly students on MINIX for projects where you have to develop some system programming and some new added feature on it. We do it regularly with students who are in their first operating system course. After after let's say 2 months, we can ask them to make some new feature added to one of the servers of MINIX.
So if I look at, say, FreeBSD and OpenBSD, then FreeBSD is now hugely popular with storage companies because of ZFS, and I don't think anybody would ever predict that everybody's going to use FreeBSD because of ZFS. So it just comes and people pick it up and that makes business. And the same thing for OpenBSD, which is popular for routers. There also, Theo didn't set out to design OpenBSD to be popular for routers. So maybe not focusing too early on a specific thing, but trying to get people enthusiastic for MINIX as something and then see where it goes instead of trying to push it in one direction, because now it's sort of, it has to be a community, so the community can sort of pull it in different directions without some sort of higher up saying, okay, we want to do this or that. And of course,
it's been out there for sort of 30 years now, so it isn't like, you know, people haven't had an opportunity to pull it this way or that way. It's true FreeBSD has ended up in strange places. Netflix is based on FreeBSD, for example. I think Yahoo is based on FreeBSD. There certainly wasn't in Kirk or anybody else's original game plan, but it sort of happened. It was the right thing at the right time.
It happened mostly because of really good network stack on FreeBSD, and that was from the beginning. Basically, that was built on
So
4.3 BSD, 4.4, and then FreeBSD.
So sometimes you have one feature.
So this is actually the feature that they actually were targeting, networking.
But now we have live update, which is an interesting feature which might be of interest to some communities. Richard?
Yes, let's continue with this idea. There are a lot of challenges in the Internet of Things or whatever. In my perception, it's just connecting normal systems to the web. For instance, traffic lights or traffic control and radio control. And these are situations where you have one functionality, switch a light, and you have to have a connection to the net because it's cheaper to manage, and you have security questions, and you have this not reboot properties. And I think these are definitely 4 strong points. And I'm sorry that I make my statement in my talk that as a security person which wants to have a secure light system or a secure railway system, I enjoy that there is no fancy browser with no more fancy multimedia support. And so I think this will be a direction, and I want to repeat it once more. People hanging systems to the net, railway control, traffic control, because it's cheaper. And there is a point where we need security, we need open source, and we need an open system for things. And though this usually wavy stuff is one area, we should really think in a more involving way about this.
There's another area which I had a postdoc who was interested in medical systems. That there's a lot of like pacemakers and embedded medical devices where they don't like to take them down for 5 minutes to put in new software from time to time. And there's security issues involving this thing and stuff, so on. That's yet another area in the embedded world where small and reliable and secure are important parameters. But I don't know, again, it's sort of embedded is sort of the key word here.
I don't think that removing fancy browser is a good idea, or thinking that we should not think about it at all, because it's a modular operation system, and fancy browser is just can be a package. So if you're creating a server to support a nuclear station or current sensor, you just don't need browser, you don't put it in, and there is no problem. I think about maybe integration with bloody enterprise, because enterprise most of the time got money, and any community needs money because there is a need of hardware, there is lots of work like testing that is not fun at all, and that has to be done. There is a need of certification. Certification is great in a way of proving for others, for enterprise, that MINIX is really valuable. It's not just written on some web page that it's awesome and it will not fail, but it will not fail. It maybe that will allow companies to give money for poor community to provide development. And that will be important.
I mean, certification implies that you've figured out what niche you want to be in and trying to get it certified for that particular niche, which is complicated and expensive. But there's, certifications are very narrow typically. And so you have to sort of figure out what you want to do. So you try to get the right certification, which is itself not easy, but it's a possibility.
It's not a way to give handles to those people who want to certificate MINIX, to give them some input. For example, for the automotive and for the medical certificates, you have to comply to the ISO 26262, and it has, much similarities with the medical standard and with the normal industrial standard. So there are very much similarities, and I think indeed for professional use, if MINIX has a certificate, it can compete with, for example, QNX.
But I think getting the certificates is difficult until you've gotten, you're focused on whatever industry whose certificate you're trying to get. And I think these are, fairly complicated things. You need a fair amount of manpower to make it suitable so it does meet the certification for whatever you're trying to get, especially if it's safety critical, where the certification process is quite stringent because, they're pretty picky about getting that. I was at a trade show not so long ago where I saw a company whose only business is helping other companies get one particular certificate for, I think it was aviation. And all I did was help other companies, get the certificate they needed for being certified in airplanes. It's quite a complicated thing and very specialized. And so you have to sort of have your niche and be focused there before you can even think about certification. Isn't let's go out next week and get a certificate. That isn't easy at all.
But it's not easier to focus only on the similarities with different handles?
There's some things that are common, but I suspect that medical devices and cars are, this is general, similarities, but they're in detail. I suspect they're really quite different. I mean, they do different things. The process of, does your company have a quality control officer, and some of that stuff is generic, but a lot of it is very specific to the area, and then first you got to get your sort of area. So I don't think that's going out and getting a certificate is easy to do if you don't know what kind of certificate you want. There aren't any general purpose certificates, I think.
I'm always interested to see concrete case studies and examples of how operating systems have been used to solve particular problems. And you can look, there are some cases for OpenBSD where people have had absolutely horrible network stories where big brand manufacturers, vendors actually failed them in quite serious circumstances. And then they kind of, as an act of last resort, they turn to something like OpenBSD, and it actually solved the problem better than they'd expected and with less pain. And for me, it's always really, I get really excited when I kind of go to like undeadly.org or you read the FreeBSD newsletter, and you can see like, here's this example, and here are pictures, and here is some kind of commentary about the situation. It really paints a picture. I think that's very, very valuable, and it gets people excited and it generates some interest, because you might have an operating system that's got some very unique features. And in particular, I'm very interested, I like the architecture, but I don't necessarily know exactly how those features can be applied to solve a particular problem that I have. So I do think it's very useful to have kind of a PR media thing that is actually going around and talking to people who are using the platform. So today we've had a presentation from a handful of people from companies who are apparently spending company time working on features and support for hardware. But I actually don't know exactly what they're using it for. I haven't seen today any kind of concrete examples of, here is where I put this development effort into getting this platform supported, and then I installed it here, and it did this, and it was perfect for this application, and it's been running for 6 months or 12 months, and I haven't had any problems, and the customer's happy. For me, it's very interesting to see where it is used and how it's used.
I mean, like we've already talked about the firewall. Yeah. That was sort of an academic project, but yeah. A firewall is an example of something you can use it in, or that kind of, routers or networking equipment. But yes, you're saying basically case studies. But again, I don't know who's actually using it in commercial products, so it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. To find some good case studies that we could illustrate.
So you put a broadcast and say, we're looking for stories.
I'm not sure, I mean, the news group is out there, but it doesn't have a lot of traffic, which, given how many people actually are downloading the code, I would have expected much more traffic on the news group. If 36,000 or 3,000, 6,000 people are downloading it every month, I think there'd be at least more questions. Like, I don't know how to do this, so on. But there isn't much traffic there, which surprises me, given the long history of 6,000 or 7,000 downloads a month, going back 10 years. That people aren't at least asking questions, how do you do this or whatever. And so I don't know how to broadcast it. I mean, the news groups are the only, or the website news group, sort of the only channels that I can think of. I'm giving talks all over the world, but that's, how else do you, try to collect case studies from people who've done it? And maybe put an explicit message there, hey, anybody's done a real thing with this, let us know. But yeah, I agree. Having case studies of these guys have this thing, that would be very nice. But how do you sort of collect those?
From my point of view, it's just too hard to try it out. Because right now, just for example, the x86 architecture, you really need some kind of, I would say, antique hardware to make it run. Because you need to install a VirtualBox, or you need to install, or you have a SATA drive, or a DVD drive, or whatever, to make it run at all. And that will not happen, because no one will also choose it for a mission-critical project if it's not possible to feel it before and to have an idea how it works. Is it reliable? Does it really fit to my needs? Or things like that. And from my opinion, or from my point of view, it's just like having it more easy to install, a mass storage device or whatever, would make it quite easy for the first step and would even allow something like Ubuntu, for example, started after Knoppix having the live system. It would be also quite nice to have that, for example, with a MINIX 2, where you can just put it on your laptop, on your computer, whatever, without the need of installing it into, onto hard disk or whatever. Just try it out, feel like it works, things like that, and then get an idea how you can use. And then also agree to film. I do not think it's a good idea to search, to look for a niche right now, as long as the community is so small, because you need to be as generic as possible so that everyone is able to find his personal use case for MINIX.
Yeah. I mean, it does run on the BeagleBone, right out of the box. You can download the SD card image and put it on and boot it. So I mean, that's an example of where you can do it right off the bat.
But the BeagleBone Black, for example, it's not a good sample for doing, I would say, serious computing. It's just too weak at all. And it's just one certain ARM architecture. I would even say, if we really talk about ARM, we have to talk about NVIDIA Jetson or whatever. We have to talk about CPUs which are used in smartphones, in tablets, and all things like that, and not something like a niche like BeagleBone Black, because it's working there. It's even not working on a Raspberry Pi, which is also not a high-end processor at all.
Raspberry Pi, the reason we didn't do that is that's not open source. And trying to find out how the Raspberry Pi works is not easy, whereas the BeagleBone is actually documented. So I'm aware of the Raspberry Pi, but it's an issue because it's hard to do. But yeah, the work of porting it to some more modern platform and making it 64 bits and so on, you sort of need a community for people to do these things. And until there's a community, it doesn't happen, and it's like a chicken and egg problem. Without it being ported to modern hardware, people don't want it, but you can't get it ported to modern hardware until the people to do it. And so, I don't know how to get the ball rolling.
I might have two ideas for this generic community issue, and please take it as a view of an outsider. First, there are examples that you should avoid, and one of the most important one in the domain of operating systems is OpenSolaris. So OpenSolaris was Solaris, so it was a decent monolithic kernel operating system, technically on par with Linux. They open sourced it, they wanted to attract community, but they did, in my opinion, one thing totally wrong. They wanted to encourage people to contribute stuff, to port it to their own machines, use it, but they kept all the control centered in the company. So if there should be a MINIX community, it should be really community driven. So there shouldn't be any, of course there might be some steering committee designing some roadmap generally, but actually the community should feel that they have the word. They can change something, they can change the direction of the project.
That's what I'm trying to do. You have to have some people to sort of determine who's a committer and so on. But I'm trying to decentralize exactly what I want to do. But how do you do that? So it was centrally controlled. Now I'm trying to decentralize it, let the community do it. But how do you get there from here to there?
Well,
I understand what you're trying to say. That's absolutely true.
And my second, more practical suggestion.
Well, the Linux is a little bit less. I mean, Linus sort of runs the show there. So this model is both ways. But yeah, I completely agree with you. But how do you decentralize it? So.
Well, one practical suggestion is outreaching to the people, and you might have expected that, but we have been organizing this nice microkernel dev room at Potsdam for years,
yeah.
And you have always been invited, but there has been no MINIX free talk all these years.
Well, I think there was one talk.
Just let me say one more thing. I know that you have been at Potsdam, you have given talks to other people, but some people, and they fill an entire room, are interested in microkernels specifically. They change, they change ideas.
I asked for a dev room at FOSDEM this year and was told no. And so,
But you were more than welcome at the microphone.
yeah, but giving one talk for 1 hour with 6 other operating systems, I think has less impact than this. I think the 1 year somebody from here, I forget who it was now, gave a talk in the microkernel dev room. There weren't many people there really. But
No.
I did try this year to get a dev room. I was told no. So, yeah, it's a
What
good
I want-
idea, but I would prefer they said yes.
What I wanted to say, there is not only the community of potential developers to MINIX, there is a microkernel community, really a group of projects that see each other as competitors on one hand, but also as friends. That we exchange ideas, we exchange new directions. So that might be a seed for the open.
I mean, it's a possibility. I mean, I don't know, maybe next time, but I think my guess is that they see themselves more as competitors because they each have their own little system, which they think is really cool.
If that would be really the case, I wouldn't be here.
No, okay. Spying on, I'm not sure which system. No, but I mean, yeah, there's this, I mean, like Gerner, I know Gerner, and, we're always talking about, microkernels and whatnot. We're on the same wavelength on some things, and we're on different wavelengths on other things, so it's not, it's sort of a mixed bag. It's true. But FOSDEM is a possibility. I said, I did give a talk, I was keynote speaker at FOSDEM a couple of years ago. I did ask for a dev room. I'm certainly aware of FOSDEM, and I tried to go that route. I mean, tried again, but it isn't like we've ignored FOSDEM. I was keynote speaker a couple of years ago. There was thousands of people there. The video of my talk at FOSDEM is, last time I looked at, like 60 or 70,000 people have seen the video. So I'm certainly aware of FOSDEM, but, we tried, but don't.
There was at FOSDEM was an in memoriam of Ian Murdoch, the founder of Debian. And the thing that I didn't know or didn't remember was that he really set up Debian as a community first and only then as a Linux distribution. And I'm not saying that we should literally copy the Debian model, but it might be worth looking into what he said, but maybe also what other projects do and how they really structure their communities. And then, I don't know if you have the time, if you can look at a number of different projects, how they're structured, how the community is organized, and present that to the MINIX group, and then say, well, we have sort of these alternatives, let's have a discussion and pick one of them. Because right now there's sort of no input. You need to have a community, but you need to have some more ideas like if, for example, when is somebody a member of the community? I think in FreeBSD you have to be a committer to be counted. Yeah. But maybe for the MINIX community that would not work because it uses Git and it's based on pools or something. So you need to have...
I know how FreeBSD works, and I know how NetBSD works, and it's somewhat different. NetBSD, for example, has an official foundation and is a legal contract. If you want to be a member, you have to sign the legal contract which says you won't do any bad things, and then you get to be a committer, and if you commit enough stuff, you continue to be a committer. If you don't commit enough stuff, you sort of timed out, and but the question is, how do you build the community? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So I agree with you that you can't start out with the community if there's no reason to be in the community. All the projects that I look at now are already going. Apache or Firefox, whatever, they're already running. The question is, how do you go from very small community to a bigger and more active community? That's the step that I don't know how to take exactly. So I agree that
certainly
should be a community.
Debian started from one person decided to have a community.
Yeah, but it was community built around something that was already used like Linux.
What?
Yep.
That wasn't a distribution, but it was still around Linux. So.
Yeah, but we have a community. I mean, there's a room full of people that do stuff with MINIX 3, so it's not that you start with one person. You already have...
But it was... He started a community around more people from different communities. So different people, different users of Linux. And here you're starting a community around MINIX, so basically you're attracting the people who are already attracted to MINIX.
So
it was a community of wider spread.
But certainly doing PRs, I gave 5 talks all over the world last year, wrote an article for communications, which gets like 65 or 70,000 people. I mean, certainly working on PR, and we have a website, there's a Google News group. We're doing some things, trying to build the community. I would think that one thing which surprises me, I said before, is that there isn't more discussion about all these things on the news group. That's sort of the mechanism for people, for the community to say what they want and, talk about things. I don't know if there's another,
But
that's the
are
wrong
decisions
mechanism.
taken on the news group?
What?
Are decisions taken on the news group? For example, I don't
Nobody
think...
is there. I don't know how, how
but
do you
for
make-
example, take what David's changed, the MIB. I don't think he first presented a plan on the news group, asked for input, and then merged it.
Yeah.
He merged it.
Yeah,
That's not how you create a community.
yeah.
This is what I have learned about. I mean, this is centralized control that cannot ever create an open community. You have to give up the control and
Yeah.
let the community really look on the plans before they are implemented, then just complain about the implementation afterwards.
Yeah,
So-
I mean,
so-
I don't know how to, I want to do that. I'm anxious, I'm eager to do that. I just, like, the thing which surprises me is, there isn't more activity on the news group of people. I mean, the very beginning with, back, 1987 or whatever it was, there was endless discussion on Usenet about, I want this or I don't like that or whatever. And that's all sort of gone away, but there's still large numbers of downloads. It isn't like nobody is paying attention, but they're sort of not there. And you can post something on the news group of, I have this idea, what do you think of it? And, it would be nice if there was a lot of reaction to it, positive or negative. Maybe we could do that more, but there isn't much activity there at all, despite the fact that there are very large numbers of downloads. So how do you, we could say, I'm thinking of doing, we could have said, we're thinking of doing a live update, what do you guys think about it? Maybe there'd be like one message saying, okay, cool. How do you get from A to B? That's what I don't know. Yeah?
Yeah, so to me, if you want to build a strong community, one prerequisite to that is to have a specificity of purpose. So there needs to be a very clear purpose for this. And when it concerns MINIX specifically, to me, one of the most unique points about it is its teachability and its simplicity, which result in a low footprint and a low attack surface. And those seem to be, to me, its unique selling points. So whatever direction MINIX takes, and whatever direction the MINIX community takes, to me it seems like if those things go away, then MINIX just becomes severely crippled Linux, basically.
Yeah. Because it's been in that niche of sort of teaching for about 30 years now. So it isn't like we've forgotten it, or in fact I resisted and have been continuously resisting making it so complicated that nobody understands it anymore. So I agree with you. But besides teaching, is there another niche where it could work? And we thought maybe embedded systems, because legacy there isn't so important. If somebody's making a camera or something, it doesn't really matter what they ran on their previous camera. This one's a new product. And so you don't have to necessarily be backward compatible with the old stuff. So the teaching is certainly there and is important. We haven't forgotten it. And should there be a new version of the book? That's an interesting question which I have to discuss with my co-author at some point. But so we haven't forgotten teaching. But also, what about it being used as an embedded system, for example? I don't know, Mark?
The move to put BSD applications on top of MINIX was a very bright one, I find, because that makes it possible for people to use it on day-to-day on laptops and that kind of thing. And I think that's something which is very important, because for instance, maybe in the favor of MINIX in the field of real-time system, embedded system, and so on, is that people know it. And therefore, the fact that students are in contact with it in operating system course is one thing, but the fact that they can use it on small systems they are working every day with is also a very, very good thing. If you look at other companies such as Microsoft, yeah, in the beginning they were only doing machines that were used by single people. Now they are selling servers. Why are they selling servers? Because there were so many people that were used to Windows as a desktop that they wanted to have Windows on their servers. And in the beginning, there were huge catastrophes with this, like that chip that tried to, on which the control was given to a Windows machine and that couldn't get out of the cheesy. And well, it was a good thing it was the control of the movement of the chips and not the guns that were, because all the strings were moved.
Yeah.
But the point where they decided at that time, it was a long time ago, to put Windows to control the ship, was that it was much, there were many more people used to work with Windows than with Unix or whatever. So giving the possibility to use MINIX as a desktop is a very good thing.
That would argue then for, what other software is needed, like a browser. I mean, I don't think Firefox is portable, but something like Midori might be ported. So if that's true, then the direction would be make it more, we have these 6,000 packages now. A browser, I think, is one of the main things that's missing. That could be done.
What everybody, I didn't look at what runs on it because I'm not using that on my notebook. But for instance, having things like LibreOffice and things like that running on it would be...
Like what?
OpenOffice, LibreOffice, this kind of suite.
Those are hard things to port, I suspect. Never looked at it, but
I don't know.
I don't know. If there's a NetBSD version, that might sort of work. That's, so porting more, that was the question here. Is there key software missing, OpenOffice or something like that, or a browser, or, so that's a different approach than going for the embedded system, right?
I'm looking at it from a little bit different point. It would be perfect if the current hardware, so if I go to a shop and buy a new laptop with the current new hardware, then the NetBSD fused with whatever is there. I don't care if it's a browser or not. If I take a new hardware, buy it from the shop, put it in the MINIX and it works.
Yeah, that would be a very...
So for me the problem at the moment is less the user land on top, but more the
hardware. But that's a different direction. If you're saying the focus should be make it run on current notebooks and so on, that's a different story than make it work in embedded or 64 bits, or that's the question. That's why I thought there should be a steering committee to think about exactly, should the focus be on making it work on current notebooks, making it work on Raspberry Pi, making it work on other embedded boards. Those are the decisions about the roadmap. And that's something I don't want to do myself. And that's why I was trying to get some kind of a steering committee together to think about which of those more or less incompatible directions that you want to go in. Because if the focus is making it work on current notebooks and putting on a browser and putting on OpenOffice, that's not the same as making it work on the successor to the Beagle board, as it were, or making it 64 bits. Those are different directions. You sort of can't do all of them at once. Maybe they're incompatible. I don't know.
For me, one thing was I really tried to use MINIX as a day-to-day operating system, and it was to a certain point really painful because I had it installed, everything's fine. Now I have a workstation with a Xeon, has 4 cores, plus hyper threading means I have 8 cores there, up and running. I tried to recompile the MINIX stuff, and it took ages. It really took ages because there was no multiprocessor support for the multi-core. I could not get my 32 gigabytes of RAM because I'm only bound to 32-bit. I can only address this into 2 gigabytes or things like that. And after that, what I did, I installed FreeBSD on it. And since then, my build times are, I don't know, 6 minutes, 7 minutes for the whole tree, compared to MINIX before, where it took, I don't know, 4.5 hours.
Yeah. But we thought about that. The reason we switched to the focus on embedded is we thought that sort of winning the desktop war against 4 or 5 BSDs and Linux and Windows and OS X was a tall order. And it wasn't likely to beat all of those. So what does it do that FreeBSD doesn't do better? So embedded is a different world. And so trying to win the desktop wars, I think, is going to be harder than trying to make it work on some modern embedded board, some board like that.
There's still one thing missing. Embedded.
I don't know. I mean, QNX is not visible on desktop and very widely used. I mean, if you're focused on...
How can we talk about embedded systems without support for USB? How can we talk about embedded system without support for USB? You can run MINIX on BeagleBone Black, yes, awesome. What do I do with that? BeagleBone Black has USB OTG, so a lot of people who start with Linux or FreeBSD, what they do, they start creating some USB gadgets. And that's the biggest selling point because people are excited that they actually can create some hardware, whatever they want to do with it.
So that would
They
argue
connect
for...
it to their laptop or whatever, and it does some additional thing. You can run a Tor client there and have the whole network being written by that. And if you don't have USB support, then how can you talk about...
So that argues that USB support is the key thing that's
well, yes.
needed. I mean, that's a different direction than porting over Office.
It's important for both. If you go to desktop or if you go to embedded devices.
Right, that's what I meant about, like, what's the roadmap, and who decides that, how do you get the community to say, gee, we think that going for USB and embedded devices is more important than porting a browser and open office. Those are different directions, and given a small group, you sort of can't do both simultaneously.
If I run MINIX on BeagleBone and I can't connect my keyboard to BeagleBone, if I can't connect my Wi-Fi adapter to BeagleBone, then what's the use of BeagleBone?
I would like to jump in there because in the end, if you look at really applications of embedded systems, it's really not about recreating a computer, putting a keyboard and a mouse.
I'm talking right now about
if you look at
recreating
Internet of
computer, but
Things,
you have Internet of Things, right? So most of the time you create some device and you either have to connect it to some computer. So you either do that, you can do that by cable, but a lot of the boards, they don't have Ethernet adapter. You have to buy a USB to Ethernet.
Okay, let's cut this for a minute.
Wi-Fi USB adapter.
But there's a bunch of different directions that have been proposed. You know, one is, making it work on modern laptops so you can use it as a desktop system. Other is making it work on modern embedded boards so you can actually use it. Another is 64 bits so you can use more than 4 gigabytes of RAM. These are all different directions. In mind, and there was earlier the comment that this should be decentralized and the community should decide. And I'm not sure how to go from where we are now to having the community say there's more interest in embedded than there is in desktop and so on. That's why I want to set up some kind of a steering committee of more people than me, I don't know how big it should be, to think about these issues. Let me just take sort of a strong poll here. Suppose we were to set up some committee to try to talk about and run a discussion on the news group, I guess, about where should we go from here? How many people might be interested in and have the time to be on a steering committee to think about, what we're going to do next? Show of hands.
Depends how much time you're talking about.
I don't know. I mean, it's like initially thinking about these issues and then going forward trying to find volunteers. If we decide, for example, that the big thing is to make it run not on the BeagleBone, but on some other more modern, small board like that, which is, maybe 64 bits, then that's a direction. That's a different direction than open office. Sort of rough show of hands. So maybe I should send out mail to everybody. I got everybody's email address, I think. Maybe send out. I'd like to have this discussion on Usenet, to have, on the Google group, to have a community. That's exactly what many people have said. I'd like to continue this discussion in case there, because I don't think we can do it today, about who would want to be on the committee. Probably it would be by email or news group initially, and maybe there'd be a meeting once in a while on Skype. I don't know.
And even what you see nowadays also is that perhaps a news group is also something for the older generation. Perhaps it has to be like a forum, Facebook page, or really.
Okay, that's a good question. Is there some other media, and maybe Facebook? Is there some other media on a Twitter feed? Seems an odd place to do this, 140 character time. But is there some other medium? To me, it seems the news group has everything you want. You put it on, everybody sees it. It's all there. It's public, open. Is there some other medium that's better than the Google group? IRC is sort of.
Maybe it's easy because you don't actually need to have another page, but anyway, you look at your email. So if you are on distribution list, you get the mail. You don't have to go to a different tool.
So a mailing list is better than a news group?
Yeah.
Is it, how many people think a mailing list is better than a news group? That's interesting, okay. I think just the opposite, but other people think that.
But that's actually one thing about all the other operating systems. Everyone has mailing lists for developers, for communities. No one is using, because not no one, but it's harder to get into Usenet, especially if you want to attract new communities.
Do you think a mailing list is a better idea?
Because everyone has a mail line.
Open Indian
And you just start with new mail.
What?
Open Indian even OS mailing there are many mailing lists.
So a mailing list is a better way. It never occurred to me. I always think that news groups. What? Yeah, I suppose. Right. I don't. So there's some configuration apparently, but it's certainly possible to do it both ways. That everything you send, you have to do it a certain way, and then it appears on the news group, and it appears, on the mailing list.
If you really want to,
That might be
you
right.
can subscribe to a Google group, for example, and you can configure it to get a mail for every new post, so you do not have to look into it every time.
Okay, so
It's already done, it's already there.
That's an important suggestion. I thought of that. Yeah.
One small comment. You have said that there were many ideas like USB supporting, desktop supporting new hardware, 64 bits, and you said that they might be in conflict. But actually, if the community decides what should be done, they are free to do it, and they will do it. There will be some contributors who might work on these things independently. So the only goal for the theory community is to somehow make sure that there are no fights, there are no actual conflicts.
No, but
but it's not up to the community to decide what has to be done by some paid employees.
No. The thing that I was a little bit worried about is that changes you might have to make to the system to have it run open office, are incompatible or certainly cause trouble for people who are interested in Internet of Things. The open office guys say, first thing we want to do is make it 64 bits, and it's going to support 64 gigabytes of RAM, and the Internet of Things guys saying 64 bits, 64 gigabytes, And, it has to be done in such a way as these things don't conflict with each other. And I don't know how easy it is to do that in a distributed way. Somebody makes a commit which which works for his part of the universe, but ruins it for a different part of the universe.
Well,
that's the thing I'd be worried about.
This has to be taken care of.
That's why I thought you need some kind of a somewhat centralized control, but more distributed than it is now, to make sure if somebody's committing something to make open office work, it's not ruining for the Internet of Things guys. Otherwise, if somebody just changes something or other, and all of a sudden it's humongous, but says, so what? Everybody's got at least 32 gigabytes nowadays. What's the big deal? But Internet of Things guys don't have 32 gigabytes, and so they don't want this. That's what I was worried about.
That's true, but the software architecture, when it is componentized, really well designed, the changes can be local. Creating a new port to a new hardware,
People have to think
does
about.
not necessarily have to break anything.
People have to think about other people. If you're writing a new file server for an Internet of Things thing, and it's a separate file server, fine. Just another file server, no problem. But it's when you're changing core parts of the system, you have to be very careful that you're not ruining it for some other piece of the world. That's the thing I was worried about. But I think, some kind of a steering committee or news group or mailing list where these things will be discussed in advance. I was thinking of changing this and so on. Other people could pipe up and say, hey, wait a minute, that makes it bad for this part of the world. So if you're doing it, do it in a way that doesn't ruin it, for these people. But getting it for everything is hard.